Hey horror fans, Bored Now and Rachel McDonald back with you. On this video, we're returning to the Halloween franchise with the sixth film now, or technically, I'm not even sure they had the sixth. I think they just call it Halloween: The Curse of
Curse
Michael
of
Myers.
Michael Myers, yes. I don't
Yeah,
have a full Blu-ray to hold up today, people, because this is actually part of a 3-pack I own. So
uh,
there we go.
God, that
Technically, this
freak.
is what we're doing.
Yeah,
But yes, I
yeah,
don't think it's called Halloween. No, it's just Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. So technically,
and
Halloween 6.
I think this is something they do sometimes when you get quite deep into a franchise where I think they think it's a bit off-putting to the audience if you have like maybe it just telegraphs a bit like this franchise has been like dragged out a bit, and so they'll just put a title that hides the fact that it's like the sixth movie. I'm
Yeah.
sure that's something that goes through their minds because I think it happens quite a lot. But
Mm.
yeah, so you can call it Halloween 6 if you like, but The Curse of Michael Myers is the title. 1995, so we're into the 90s now, which I think is probably important when you see some of the stuff in the
Yeah.
film. Also, just before we start talking about it, I will say that you probably know this anyway, but there's also a producer's cut of this. Um,
Oh, I didn't actually
you
know
didn't know
that.
that.
Okay. Oh.
So I'm not really sure what version you saw. I mean, I just
I
rented
think this
it.
is just the normal, like,
Yeah,
theatrical
I'm
version.
gonna
Yeah.
assume that's what I saw. Because there's like just hearing some of the stuff about the film. Apparently, there's fans out there who really like the producer's cut, and they sort of start claiming that then it's like when you see that version of it, it's like the best sequel. Um, I think there may even be a few nutcases who think it's the best film overall, including the original, which is
Wow.
pretty.
Y-
But certainly,
Yeah.
I think there's people who argue it's the best sequel. But from what I've heard, there's not a lot of difference. The producer, like, I think there's maybe a certain story development that is a bit more straightforward and makes a bit more sense in the producer's cut. But from what I hear, it's not really that different. So I think whichever
Yeah.
version you see, I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference.
Joe Chappelle. Never heard of
Chappelle,
him.
sorry, yeah,
Mm.
and he did episodes of The Wire. I mean, that's what came up when
Oh,
I.
okay.
So it's sort of interesting when you watch this movie. I'm not sure what other films he's done, but
Mm.
maybe quite an early movie. But I hadn't heard that name before, so it's one of these funny little oddity sort of facts. This guy who obviously did this episodes of this really credible, critically acclaimed show.
Yeah.
Very early on, he did, Halloween 6. It's sort of
Yeah.
funny, but anyway, obviously, the Curse of Michael Myers gives you a bit of a hint what direction they go in, and it was partly set up in the last film. But do you want to describe the setup to the plot?
I'll
Or
try,
try
but I
to?
have to admit, I found the first 10 minutes of this film I spent going, what exactly is going on in this film? Because it
Yeah,
takes a while. So
it's a struggle.
we've had a bit of a time jump. So the last movie ended with Michael being in jail, then the jail being blown up, little Jamie walking in, finding that Michael had escaped, and then nothing. Now, when this movie resumes, I think we're at least 10 years later, given how old Jamie looks in the opening scene.
Yeah,
And no
that
one
is.
has seen Michael or Jamie in all this time. So Haddonfield, he's become a bit of like a boogie, like he's actually become like the boogeyman now. He's kind of this like
Yeah,
urban legend almost. And they've been banning Halloween for like the last X amount of years. And so, of course, this year they decide to do Halloween again. And of course, well, Michael comes home. Then, okay, this is where it gets really creepy, and we're going to talk about this later on in the film because I did not like this development, but you end up finding out that Michael has actually had Jamie these last 10 years. She is now pregnant, and yes, that's
so
happened
there's a
exactly
suggestion
how,
that yeah,
yeah, exactly how we think it's happened. And most of this movie is, so she gives birth at the beginning of the movie, the Circle of the Thorn, which is again a whole thing that we're going to have to get into. You're going to be confused right now. You'll probably be confused later too, but we'll get into it later. The Circle of the Thorn try to take her baby. She manages to escape. Then there's this whole thing about her trying to get to safety and trying to get the baby to safety because Michael wants the baby, which again, we're going to have to talk about this whole weird direction that this movie went in. On the other hand, we have, I loved this, Paul Stephen Rudd. The movie says introducing Paul Stephen Rudd.
Referred to that before.
No. Paul Stephen Rudd being a creeper, living across the road from the old Michael's house, where apparently relatives of Laurie now live. The Strode family now lives there.
Yeah, this is all very convenient.
This is all. So he is spying on them because they decided to cast Paul Rudd in this really weird creeper role. Now he is technically playing little Tommy, who is the kid that Laurie babysat in the very first movie. Again, this is all just within the first 10 minutes, people. And he is watching this family. This family is one messed up family. So we have a dickhead of a father. This is probably the worst dad we have seen so far. I think these are supposed to be, they don't actually explain 100% how they're related to the Strodes. I think this might be Laurie's uncle. I think there's an implication that he's,
I think so.
Yeah, Laurie's parents, brother. He's an arsehole. So he lives with his grown-up daughter, her 6-year-old son, their teenage son, and his wife. The dad, we get some good old-fashioned domestic violence just for the hell of it. Like, that comes out of nowhere with him smacking his daughter around. And the little kid, the little 6-year-old kid.
Yeah, because he refers to the kid as a bastard, basically, doesn't he?
Yeah, and the kid is, like, getting some weird flashbacks or flash forwards or something where he's imagining killing people. So this is the whole setup of the movie, and then from there it just kind of, they try to make these kind of 3 storylines intertwine, and it just doesn't work in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, to sum up, you've got those 2 different sides. So you've got obviously the baby plot, and obviously essentially, because obviously she's killed off, but the Jamie character trying to get that to a safe place. Very convoluted the way the Paul Rudd character sort of finally gets to the baby. It's, you know,
he like finds her abandoned in a.
Yeah, the way he is about it though, because she's on like a radio station or something.
Yes,
and it's like. From that, he's able to decode roughly where it's going to be. Yeah.
What I remember is because Haddonfield is so obsessed with Michael Myers, there's a local radio station that is doing some sort of introspective on him. So they're getting people to call in. And one of the calls is Jamie, and she's calling out for help. And she's like, Dr. Loomis, because yes, Loomis is still alive. Loomis is still alive and kicking. I was actually surprised. I didn't realize that he was still around. And from that call, Tommy manages to deduce where she is and somehow goes and finds the baby.
Yeah, and he ends up finding it in a random bathroom at the
a petrol station or something like that.
So, so it could have been there for forever, basically, before he. And you know, how would he guess? Then that's where it's been left. It's like. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous.
And I was finding, just the first 20 minutes, I just kept thinking to myself, this doesn't feel like a Halloween film. This feels completely different. It doesn't have, at least, we talked about 4 and 5, 4 in particular tries to go back to the roots of the original film, you know, and 5 at least continues from there. But this one just felt like if you didn't know it was a Halloween film and you started watching, it just feels like a generic horror film, or at least that's how I was feeling as I was watching it. It just didn't have that same tone that the others do.
No real focus to it. And it just felt like they needed to go with one plot or the other. You know, in a way, you didn't really need the Paul Rudd character stuff in the same film as the stuff with, you know, obviously I think her name's Karen or Kara, the mother across the street with the son, and obviously the shithead father. But you didn't need both those characters or both those plots. It didn't really feel like the same movie, and they just tried to force it. And then obviously you've got all this horrible stuff with the cult and rituals and I mean, let's talk about that for a minute, because it does a lot of damage to the Michael Myers character and what we know and love about him, and what makes him one of the great horror villains, because it sort of starts suggesting stuff then they were responsible for him becoming this maniac in the first place. There's this idea that they were like mind controlling him. He's got a gang with him. I mean, obviously they're not exactly like a gang, but you know, that sort of thing. It's like he's got helpers in this movie, and Michael Myers is less threatening if he's got other people like backing him up and like helping him, and so stuff like that is really convoluted, and you sort of lose the threat of Michael. But yeah, just the idea that he was being controlled with supernatural means really annoys me. It really loses the sense of the danger and what appealed about the character. And yeah, this is a really bad version of Michael Myers in this movie, and but it's just so confusing in the film when they're trying to do this sacrifice, and because you get this whole thing with the baby, and I didn't even know who they, like that scene in the operator, I didn't know who they were operating on, what they were trying to do. I just lost the whole...
It was really confusing. It was. And I totally agree with it taking Michael outside of the character that he's supposed to be. It's like we've talked about in previous films. He's one of the most iconic movie horror villains, because he has no motivation, because he is just pure evil, like Loomis has talked about before. You look into his eyes and there's nothing there. So this bizarre reason that they've now given him, it's like it completely takes away any mystery or any terror, because now it's almost like, well, it could have been anyone. They could have chosen anyone off the street to imbue with this curse. And then we see that with the creepy 6-year-old kid who also seems to be affected by the curse, and it really lessens the effect of Michael Myers, because it's like, well, now it doesn't matter, because it could have been anyone. It could have been Michael, it could have been Laurie, it could have been anyone they wanted to throw into the mix, and it just completely gets rid of any kind of menace. This is my least favorite Michael. He is the least menacing he's ever been. I don't like that Jamie was pregnant, because that means that at some point in time he raped her, which is just a path that they just did not need to go down.
No.
It's not in Michael's character to be sexually motivated. He never has been sexually motivated. He's not a sadistic sexual killer. He's motivated by violence and evil. And so him suddenly having all of this in his characterization, it just doesn't work. And it didn't work for me at all. So I definitely agree with what you're saying with that.
And obviously another sad note in this film, because we mentioned Loomis, this was Donald Pleasant's last ever movie. So kind of sad that he had to go out on this note, because obviously really legendary actor and great career. So many good appearances, and obviously so much a big part of the Halloween. But I think you can tell watching this then this is close to the end of his life, and maybe he didn't really want to be there, and I think that might be part of the reason for the producer's cut. That might be one of the differences, that you get less of Loomis. But in any case, it's sort of sad that in a way he was forced to do this, or pressured into doing this, and it's just appearance, and that's a sad footnote, I think, anyway. And we don't really see the best of Loomis in this, like the previous movie.
When I first saw him, though, I actually wrote, I was like, oh, wow, Loomis is still alive? Dude is invincible.
Yeah.
He's like Michael level invincible, and he's definitely more toned down in this film, which probably has to do with the fact that that Pleasance was was getting towards the end of his life. He's probably slowing down a bit. But Loomis himself as a character did not have the same impact in this movie as he's had in previous movies. He's not the same kind of nutty, he's coming character. He tries a little bit, but it's just not the same kind of muster as he has in the previous films.
Yeah, and he didn't really feel as important to the plot. I mean, I think he could have been cut out from the movie and you wouldn't really have lost anything.
Yeah, definitely. I just feel like for a lot of this movie, they just didn't know what they wanted to do. It's like we were talking about, there were 3 different storylines. You had Jamie and the baby and the cult. You had Tommy Doyle trying to find some sort of closure with what happened to him as a kid, and then you had the Strodes and whatever was going on with them. And these 3 storylines, no matter how much they tried to make them work, they just didn't blend well with each other. So I found myself so confused. I was like, what is this movie about? Is it about Tommy? Is it about Jamie? Is it about the creepy little 6-year-old kid? Like, who is the focus of this movie? And they didn't seem to be able to narrow down exactly what the focus was. There were so many scenes where I was so confused, like you, the operating scene. I was like, what's going on? What is happening in this scene? Then there were like scenes with Tommy, and he was with the Strode daughter, and they were talking, and then there was like this really weird random segue where the teenage son of the Strodes and his girlfriend were like on the radio, and the radio presenter found out that he lived in Michael's house, and he's like, oh, let's go there, and like, we've never heard of this radio presenter, and then he dies, and the movie just kept jumping around.
Didn't really build to like a satisfying payoff, because with that radio presenter, I mean, one of the things they tried to do in this, which is kind of successful and sort of interesting, but with him, he's like a shock jock, and I mean, this is at a time where that stuff was quite new, and that's just his whole persona, that he's trying to be shocking and push the envelope, and he's obviously trying to cash in on the whole Michael. And you hear his radio like shows, and there's amusing lines, isn't there? I think like one of when the specular says something about Michael Myers might be in space or something. There's just the occasional funny line who's like really obnoxious, but probably in quite a realistic way, sadly. But when he finds out, then this guy is the brother, isn't he, living in the old Myers house. When he finds out, obviously he smells gold, and it's like, let's go over, let's take a crew. But then he's just quickly killed off by Michael in the back, and that's just wasted. You'd think they would have it. Then he goes over, he's all revved up, and he would actually go to the house, and you would get a satisfying, him getting his sort of comeuppance. But instead, it's just sort of a rush, and it does nothing with it. It's not really a satisfying sort of horror type payoff of Paul Rudd, but he's not very good in this. I think he's miscast, because
definitely
Paul Rudd, you think very sort of deadpan, but very kind of likable with it.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, we've talked about this in another review tonight, but he just came off as like too sort of creepy and too. It's almost like he could have become like the Michael Myers.
Definitely.
It's like he was too sort of obsessed with this stuff, and his eyes were like almost very sort of sinister and creepy, and yet obviously he's a character we meant to have sympathy with. So it's almost like you don't. This is very early in his career, obviously, but it's almost like it's the sort of role you don't cast Paul Rudd in.
No. It just far too serious, far too creepy. Yeah, it's like you want to see Paul Rudd play like a laid-back, slacker, likable kind of guy. He just felt really, really miscast here. But I mean, very early in his career, he obviously hadn't established, the kind of roles he's known for now. But definitely a miscast. I agree. Just
some of the stuff with him, because the whole idea is then he's he's done all this research and and just some of that stuff was so stupid because a lot of it, when you just put it on paper, a lot of it like doesn't really lead you any further than just the basic, and you've got just stuff that doesn't make sense with his character, like the fact that he's kept the newspapers clippings from that night of the original movie, which obviously was a traumatizing night for him. And it's like, you never keep reminders of that stuff. And it's not as if it helps him with like his whole like investigation. So why would you keep it anyway? Just stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, overall, I think the characters are mostly pretty weak in this. I think Kara's okay. I didn't mind her. She was sort of, not amazing, but okay, fair enough. I mean, obviously, as we've been saying, I think the film needed a focus. It needed to pick one of these plots and just...
Yes.
So who knows? I mean, if they chose her plot and just ran with it and did some, Halloween-style stuff, then who knows? Been a much better movie.
I think the concept of grown-up Tommy Doyle is actually an interesting concept, and if they'd chosen to focus on that, it's like you said, it's almost like he could become an ex-killer, kind of do a bit of a Jamie thing, he's gone down this rabbit hole for so long that it's just gotten into his head. That could have been an interesting angle. Kara could have been an interesting angle, but the problem is they just tried to mash it all together. And you mentioned earlier about the kill, the disc jockey, the DJ not getting like a good kill scene, and that made me think of one thing I noted when I was watching this film is there is a complete lack of tension in this film. None of these scenes feel scary. Like I found anytime there was like a kill coming up or anytime I was supposed to be tense, I just didn't feel it at all. There wasn't a single scene in this movie that made me feel tense or like I was watching a horror film. It just felt very bland, and a lot of the kills were very, very bland. Jamie's kill was interesting. That hers was probably the most creative kill in the movie. Yeah, but like some of the other ones were just not great.
The stuff we're talking about where there's no suspense or there was just no stakes, because it's like when Beth and the boyfriend are killed, you don't really care because you've spent very little times with these, and it didn't really have a handle on the characters. It's sort of funny because in a way they're going for this weird sort of hippie vibe with them, and yet this is set in the 90s. I mean, would they be? And there's actually a Beavis and Butthead sort of reference, is it? Because there's a line from him, isn't there, where he just like laughs in like the Beavis style or the Butthead.
I think so.
Style.
Yeah,
and it's like that's cool sort of thing. But okay, so that's of its time. But yeah, these characters, I didn't really know who they were, and you spend little time with them, and their deaths are kind of rushed, so you don't. I mean, the father's death, John's death, it kind of sucked, but then when his head exploded, that made it worthwhile. That the head explosion was good, because the death itself, it was sort of over the top and it was taking me out of it. But then when they went the full hog and his head, I mean, I enjoyed it for that sort of moment.
Yeah, that one was good because, and also he was such a dick character that when he died, I was like, yes,
he had it coming.
He definitely had it coming. But even like the lead up to his death, or even like the scene earlier when Michael is in the house when the mother is there, similar to scenes in the previous movie where Michael is in the house when the girls come home. But in the previous movie, I felt tense. I felt like, oh my God, Michael's in your house. But this time I was just like, whatever. It just did not have that level of suspense, that level of tension. And because it didn't have the build up when the actual kills happened, they just felt really underwhelming. Except for, well, not really except for, but I have to say, like the end of the movie with Paul Rudd, like going to town on Michael Myers, like don't mess with Paul Rudd, man. Like he fully beats the crap out of Michael Myers, who apparently bleeds green blood. Did you notice that? he was like oozing
Yeah.
like green pus. Like, I don't know if that's supposed to be some indication of the supernatural thing, but I have to say that death was probably death because he's Michael, he doesn't die. That was probably the most fun of the movie because all of the other deaths were just so underwhelming. But when Paul Rudd's like full, like beating the crap out of him, it was like, yeah, okay, don't mess with Paul Rudd. He'll fuck you up. That was.
There was odd moments, I think it'd be why I don't have the soft spot for 90s movies you do, because this is a very 90s looking movie.
That's true.
And there's something about the way it's directed and the way it's edited, and I think of like the opening scene, just the way it's jumping about everywhere, the camera, and I mean those sets as well. It didn't look like any hospital I've ever seen. It sort of looked like a stage, basically. It looked like a sound stage sort of set. And that happens at the end of the movie when you have the convoluted stuff where Michael kidnaps, obviously, Kara and the baby, and they're locked away in the room. I mean, that was quite a funny scene, like the Paul Rudd character hacking away at the door.
Yeah.
Because it took him forever, so it was just a funny sort of visual, and I think that's part of the thing with his character in this. It's in a way he comes off as this sort of quite macho action style hero, and that's not what they were going for. That's not what this character should be in theory.
No.
So that was kind of funny, but yeah, just the way they shot these scenes. I mean, it just takes you out of it because it doesn't look like a real hospital. It does look like, and so yeah, just the way when she's pregnant, when she's being rushed to the hospital, and they're just jumping about, they're editing everything in like this sort of small scene. The themes, it's the worst it's been.
It really is.
It's like this sort of prog rock style version of the theme. And there's a
when
lot
she's
of that.
running up the staircase and it's playing and it's terrible. It's like a parody of the original theme almost.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed about the mask in this, which I don't know if it's been previously, but then you almost had like ear shapes in it, and that looked a bit naff to me. I didn't like the ears almost.
The mask I found was the mask design. It was slightly better in that the texture was back. Like they had the previous two masks. The texture has been terrible, and it looked a little bit more like the original. But the ears were bad, and the hair. This one had like bright orange like hair that stuck up, and that took me out of it. The few times that we did see it. Again, this felt like a film where Michael was not present or as present as he should have been. We definitely focused more on the other characters than on Michael himself. And so once again, he just didn't feel like that big of a threat because he just wasn't around as much. So
yeah, and there's just a lot of scenes that could have been cut out to save
definitely
time. Because there's a scene quite early when the Rudd character first talks to Loomis, and it's like in a hospital or something, and that scene didn't really serve a lot of purpose. Illusion of that operating scene, and when they were doing I mean, there was something just so crazy about the fact I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea who was being operated on, why, what the purpose of the and then at one point Michael just goes berserk, doesn't he? And I was why he just starts killing everyone.
Starts hacking everyone up. Yeah, it was like, what the hell, man? That's right, I forgot. He storms into the operating theater and just starts like flashing away. It's like, okay, cool, we've reached Jason levels of carnage now. Good stuff.
Yeah, I'll never forget that scene. I'll give them that. But yeah, they just throw in like these couple of twists which are just like, pointless sort of twists, and there's like the twist with the old lady, then
right, yes.
I mean,
the doctor with Loomis as well, that wanted Loomis to come back to the hospital, he turned out to be a bad guy as well.
Well, yeah, he turned out to be the one kind of like running the
he was like the big head honcho.
I mean, that guy always plays villains, so I wasn't really
okay.
But in any case, it is. yeah, just these twists sort of thrown in that you didn't really need.
No.
Stuff doesn't add up in the movie, doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
You know, like the Rudd character, his motivations, because at one point he just leaves them alone.
Yeah, and he just runs off.
He says, "I'll be right back," but then he wanders off to like the fair or wherever,
Yeah.
the place where you got this DJ doing his like sort of show, and he's just there for ages doing nothing. It made no sense. It just felt like this weak excuse for him to leave them, so they're like sort of vulnerable. So anything else? I think we've covered most.
I think we've covered most of it. I think now we'll get to the rating portion of it. So this one's going to be a low one, I think.
It is. I mean, I think this is the weakest one up to this point. It has one or two moments in it. It's not a total loss, but obviously last week I gave 5 a 4. So, but I have to go lower. This is worse than 5. So I'm gonna go with a 3 for this one. 3.
Yeah. This one was pretty terrible. I'd never seen this one before, so I was really disappointed by it. A complete lack of coherence and cohesion, a bad script. You had some decent actors that just had nothing to do. Characterization didn't even exist, None of these characters were well developed. Michael, the whole mythology surrounding Michael being completely changed is terrible. Like we said, just completely lessens the effect of Michael as a villain. There was no tension. There was no suspense. I'm going to go with 4 out of 10 for this one because it was just not. This is definitely the worst of all of the ones that we've done so far. And I mean, when we get to Resurrection, we'll see if that one ranks lower. But so far, I think this is the worst of it. And the thing is, it's not even like there was anything in the film that was particularly offensive. It's not like you could go, this is a terrible, rotten, awful film. It was just so confusing and so blah. It was like they just wanted to make another sequel and they just churned this out as quickly as possible with no real thought to what they were doing.
Yeah.
And so 4 out of 10 for me. Very disappointed in this installment. Very disappointed that they cast Paul Rudd in such a miscast, role. No wonder he didn't want to come back to the role because Tommy Doyle will be in the new movie. He's going to be played by the guy. He's from The Breakfast Club. He plays the nerdy guy in The Breakfast Club. Anthony Hall. That's the one.
That's
yes.
it. Yeah.
So yes, definitely disappointed.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
In such a long franchise, there can only be expected to be some duds, obviously. They can't always stay at the caliber of the first one. But up next week, we have H2O.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to this one.
Yeah. Yeah, this will be interesting, definitely, because I think there's mixed thoughts on this from the fandom. I think there's some fans who think it might be the best of the sequel and of the sequels, and then other fans who aren't so keen. So it's going to be interesting. It's the first time Jamie Lee Curtis returns to the franchise since obviously the second movie. So that's very interesting. It's the 20-year anniversary, which is what the title was referencing. And again, it's one of those, you've got some early people in early roles before they were much bigger. Michelle Williams, Josh Hartnett, a bunch of people. So it's going to be an interesting review. Be remakes I'm going to have as my least favourite because when you're just talking about offensive, I think that's the thing with those. I think they are offensive because of how unnecessary they are and what they did with the original sort of great movie. But
I have to admit, those ones I am not looking forward to. Like I've spoken about before, Zombie is a little too extreme for me. So this will be the first time I'll be watching them, and I'm thinking they will be a one-time only. Like I'm guessing I'll watch them for this review and then probably not visit them again. I am interested to see what Zombie's take is, because I know that he is a big fan of the original film and that this movie was made out of love, not out of I can do better. It was made because he loved the story so much and he wanted to put his own spin on it. But his own spin is a very unique brand of horror that I think Yeah, it's and I do know certain plot points that happen that I'm not looking forward to. So the zombie ones will be interesting, but I am looking forward to revisiting H2O next week. It's part of that whole era of slasher films that came out post Scream, which is my favorite era of horror. And if I remember correctly, it does have a lot of hallmarks of that kind of slasher era and a lot of tropes that came in then. So that one I think will be very interesting when we get to it. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And then when we do Resurrection, I'm very interested to see what your reaction to Resurrection will be, because Resurrection is truly terrible, but I haven't watched it in a good few years, so maybe nostalgia will play into will play into it, and I'll like it more this time around. But we'll see where it goes. But H2O next week, so I think that'll be a good one.
Yeah, and Kevin Williams is the writes H2O, who also wrote Scream, so that's sort of on point. So yeah, H2O next week. So yeah, check that out during the week, guys, and you can join us for our thoughts on it next week as we continue. Rachel, if you want to promote your channel, as always, you can do.
Guys, so follow me at Rachel McDonald. I have a couple of scripts I'm working on. Anyone from my channel who is watching here, I swear the Page script, it's on the way. It's coming up, guys. And I've got a couple of plans for Halloween as well. I'm going to try and get some Halloween themed videos out. So watch out for those in October. And you can follow my Twitter and my Tumblr through links are on my YouTube. So come follow me everywhere. I've got some stuff coming up.
Okay, you can take that off now. Halloween is over.
There's Danny.